The rancher gave his last horse to 2 Apache sisters. At dawn, their father came with 200 warriors. A man who has nothing left doesn't give away his last chance at survival. That's what everyone believed. That's what made sense. But when Hollis Vain led that horse out of his barn at sunset, dirt coating his torn shirt and exhaustion carving lines into his face, he didn't look like someone making a rational choice. He looked like someone who'd already made peace with the end. The 2 young women standing at the edge of his property shouldn't have been there. One leaned heavily against the other, blood darkening the fabric around her leg. They didn't speak. They didn't beg. They just watched him with eyes that expected nothing, as if they'd learned long ago that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. Hollis had spent 3 months alone on that failing ranch. 3 months since the drought took his crops. 3 months since he'd spoken to another living soul. And in all that time, the one thing he'd protected, the one thing he'd kept alive, was that horse. His last piece of value. His only way out. But something about the silence between those sisters broke something in him. Or maybe fixed something that had been broken for far longer. He gave them the horse. No words. No explanations. Just unfastened the reins and held them out. The older sister stared at him like he'd handed her a loaded weapon. The younger one's eyes widened, confusion mixing with something close to fear. This wasn't how the world worked. Men like him didn't do things like this. Not for people like them. But Hollis just nodded toward the horizon where the last light was dying, and stepped back. They took the horse, and they disappeared into the falling dark. What Hollis didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that someone had been watching from the ridge above. Someone who'd seen everything. Someone who would carry that image back to a camp where 200 warriors waited for word. The night stretched long and sleepless. Hollis sat on his porch, watching shadows move across dead fields. His rifle leaned against the wall within reach, though he wasn't sure what good it would do. The decision had been made. Whatever consequences followed were already in motion. He thought about the younger sister's leg, the way she'd winced with each movement. He thought about the older one's expression, that mixture of disbelief and desperate gratitude she tried to hide. He wondered if they'd made it to wherever they were going, if they'd survived the night, if he'd just signed their death warrant along with his own. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human choices. Wind moved through dried grass with a sound like whispered warnings. And somewhere in the darkness, the world was shifting in ways he couldn't see. When dawn broke, it brought answers. The horizon changed. It filled with shapes. Dozens of them, then hundreds, moving as one, coming straight toward the ranch. Hollis stood in his doorway, watching them come, and realized he'd made a choice that couldn't be unmade. Whatever came next was already in motion. His hands hung at his sides, fingers loose but trembling. The rifle leaned against the frame behind him, within reach but untouched. He'd known this moment would come. Some part of him had known it the instant he'd handed over those reins. The shapes on the horizon grew larger, taking form. Riders. Too many to count. They moved in formation, disciplined and deliberate. The sound reached him before he could make out individual faces. The thunder of hooves against hard earth, rhythmic and relentless. His throat tightened. 3 months of isolation. And now this. He thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. The ranch stretched out behind him, broken fences and dying land. The barn where the horse had been stood empty, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. He'd given them his only means of escape. Hollis pressed his palms against the doorframe, steadying himself. The sun climbed higher, harsh and unforgiving, throwing long shadows across the property. Dust rose from the approaching riders like smoke, obscuring details. He squinted, trying to see. Had the younger sister survived the night? Had they made it to wherever they were going? Or had something worse happened? Something that brought this army to his door? The questions churned in his gut, mixing with something else. Not quite regret, more like resignation. He'd made a choice. Whatever followed was the cost of that choice. The riders slowed as they reached the outer edge of his land. The formation shifted, spreading wider. Hollis counted 20, then 50, then stopped counting. They encircled the property, moving with precision. Not a raid, not chaos. This was something organized. His chest constricted. Organized meant intentional. They'd come here specifically. For him. One rider broke from the formation, moving ahead of the others. The figure sat tall, wrapped in leather and fabric that caught the wind. Behind them, the massive warriors held position, waiting. Hollis's heart hammered against his ribs. He forced himself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. His father's voice echoed from somewhere deep. Panic gets you killed, boy. Stay present. But present meant facing what was coming. The lone rider approached the fence line and stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. The warrior remained mounted, perfectly still. Then slowly they dismounted. Hollis felt his muscles lock. Every instinct screamed at him to reach for the rifle. Instead, he stepped out from the doorway, moving into the open where he could be seen clearly. If this was the end, he wouldn't meet it hiding. The warrior walked forward, crossing into the yard. The sun caught the side of their face, and Hollis's breath caught. It was the older sister, Kaya. She moved differently now. The exhaustion that had weighed her down the night before was gone, replaced by something harder. She walked like someone who belonged exactly where she was. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They weren't filled with gratitude. They weren't soft with relief. They were measuring him, calculating, weighing something he couldn't name. She stopped 15 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to remain cautious. Hollis waited. His throat felt like sand. Kaya didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She just stood there, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Behind her, the massive warriors remained motionless, watching. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying across the space between them. He wants to see you. Not a request. A statement. Hollis swallowed hard. Who? Kaya's expression didn't change. The one you gave the horse to is his daughter. You took something from him without asking. Now he'll decide what that means. The words landed like stones in his chest. Behind Kaya, the formation parted. A single rider emerged from the center, moving forward with deliberate slowness. The figure was broader than the others, commanding. Even from a distance, Hollis could feel the weight of authority radiating from him. Kaya turned slightly, gesturing toward the approaching rider. That's Nahali, and you're about to learn what happens when you interfere with his family. Nahali moved like water across stone. Smooth, inevitable, unstoppable. His horse stepped carefully, hooves striking the hard ground in measured rhythm. As he drew closer, details emerged that made Hollis's pulse quicken. The man was older than he'd expected. Gray threaded through black hair that fell past his shoulders. Scars marked his arms, visible even from a distance. Lines that told stories of survival. But it was his face that held Hollis frozen, weathered, hard, and completely unreadable. Hollis forced himself to stand straight. His legs felt weak, but he locked his knees. Running wasn't an option. Begging wouldn't help. Whatever judgment was coming, he'd face it standing. Nahali stopped 20 feet away and dismounted in one fluid motion. He landed without sound, feet planted wide. For several seconds, he simply looked at Hollis. Not with anger, not with curiosity, with something closer to assessment. Like a man examining an object whose purpose he didn't yet understand. Hollis's mouth went dry. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he possibly say? That he'd felt sorry for them? That he couldn't stand by and watch? That something in him broke when he saw that younger sister bleeding? None of it would matter. Not to a father who'd just learned a stranger had touched his family's fate. Nahali walked forward, each step deliberate. He stopped within arm's reach, close enough that Hollis could see the deep lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his breathing remained perfectly controlled. Up close, the man was even more imposing, taller than Hollis by 2 inches, broader through the shoulders. Everything about him spoke of strength that came from decades of necessity, not choice. You gave them the horse. Nahali's voice was low, graveled, but clear. English, spoken with careful precision. Hollis nodded. His voice came out rougher than intended. Yes. Why? The question landed like a challenge. Hollis felt the weight of 200 warriors watching from behind Nahali. One wrong word. One perceived insult. And this ended badly. But lying felt worse than dying. They needed it more than I did. Nahali's eyes narrowed. You knew who they were. No. You knew what giving away your last animal meant. Hollis's jaw tightened. Yes. And you did it anyway. It wasn't a question. Hollis said nothing. Nahali took another step forward, closing the distance until they were almost chest to chest. This close, Hollis could see the faint tremor in the older man's hands. Not from fear or weakness, but from something restrained, something held tightly under control. My daughter told me what you did. Nidida, the younger one. She would have died without that horse. They were being hunted. 3 men following them since dawn. If they'd been caught on foot. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Hollis felt something shift in his chest. Is she all right? Nahali's expression flickered. Just for a moment. Something like surprise crossed his features. Then it was gone, replaced by that same unreadable mask. She's alive. Because of you. The words should have brought relief. Instead, they hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. Nahali turned slightly, glancing back toward the warriors. Then he looked at Hollis again. And this time, there was something different in his gaze. Something that made Hollis's stomach drop. 3 men were tracking my daughters. They were found this morning, half a day's ride from here. Hollis waited, tension coiling in his gut. They'd been asking about a rancher. White man living alone. They wanted to know if he'd seen 2 Apache women. They were going to come here next. The implication hit like a fist. Those men had been headed to his ranch, looking for the sisters. If Hollis had kept the horse, if he'd sent the women away on foot, they would have been caught. And he would have been questioned. Maybe worse. You didn't just save my daughters, Nahali said quietly. You made yourself a target. Behind him, the warriors shifted. Not threateningly, more like anticipation. Nahali stepped back, creating space. His hand moved to his side, and Hollis's entire body went rigid. But Nahali didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he reached into the leather pouch at his belt and pulled something out. A piece of worn fabric. No, a strip of leather. Braided and old, with markings Hollis didn't recognize. Nahali held it out. You'll need to come with us. Hollis stared at the offered item, his mind racing. Come with you where? Nahali's expression remained unchanged. Those men had friends. More are coming. They know you helped my daughters. If you stay here, you won't survive the week. The weight of that statement settled over Hollis like frost. And if I go with you? Nahali's eyes locked onto his. Then you live long enough to understand what you've done. Hollis had nothing to pack. The few belongings he owned fit into a canvas sack that hung light against his shoulder. He took one last look at the ranch, at the structure that had been his for 5 years, and felt nothing. The drought had killed it long before today. 2 warriors flanked him as they rode. Not as guards, exactly, but not as companions either. They watched him with the same careful attention someone might give a wolf brought into camp, uncertain whether it would bite or bow. The journey took most of the day. They moved through terrain Hollis knew from a distance, but had never crossed on foot or horseback. Rocky passages that required careful navigation. Dry riverbeds where the earth cracked like old leather. The landscape stretched endless and unforgiving, offering no shade and no mercy. No one spoke. The silence pressed against him, heavier than the heat. Hollis kept his eyes forward, trying to read the situation. The warriors moved with practiced efficiency, each one alert, but not tense. This wasn't a war party. This was an escort. But for what? As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, they crested a rise. Below, nestled against a canyon wall, lay the encampment. Dozens of shelters constructed from hide and wood, arranged in careful formation. Smoke rose from several fires. Children ran between structures, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. Women worked near the flames, preparing food, tending to tasks that kept communities alive. It looked nothing like what Hollis had imagined. This wasn't a war camp. This was a home. They descended into the camp, and activity paused. Faces turned toward them, expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. A few elders stood near the central fire, watching with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. Nahali dismounted first. He spoke in his own language, words flowing with authority. Some of the tension in the watching faces eased, but not all of it. Hollis could feel the weight of judgment, the questions being asked without voice. Who is this outsider? Why is he here? What has he done? Kaya appeared from one of the larger shelters, moving quickly to Nahali's side. She spoke quietly, gesturing toward a smaller structure at the edge of the camp. Nahali nodded, then turned to Hollis. You'll stay there tonight. Food will be brought. Don't wander. It wasn't a suggestion. Hollis followed where Kaya led, acutely aware of the eyes tracking his movement. The shelter was modest, barely tall enough to stand in, with a single opening covered by hide. Inside, a bedroll lay on the ground along with a water skin and a small pile of dried meat. Kaya stopped at the entrance. For the first time since they'd left his ranch, she looked at him directly. My sister wants to see you. Hollis's chest tightened. Is she? She's recovering. The wound was deep but clean. She'll walk again. Kaya's expression remained guarded. She doesn't understand why you did it. None of us do. Hollis had no answer to that. He barely understood it himself. Kaya studied him for another moment, then spoke again, her voice lower. The men who were tracking us. They weren't random hunters. They worked for someone. Someone who has reason to want our father's family dead. The words settled like ice in Hollis's gut. Who? We don't know yet. But they're organized, well-funded, and they won't stop because 3 of their men disappeared. She paused. By helping us, you put yourself in their path. That's why Father brought you here. If you'd stayed at that ranch, they would have found you, and they would have made you talk before they killed you. Hollis felt his hands curl into fists. I didn't ask for protection. No, you didn't ask for anything. That's why you're still breathing. Kaya's gaze hardened. My father has seen many white men. Most want land. Some want gold. Others want to prove something. But you, she shook her head slightly. You gave away the one thing keeping you alive, and you asked for nothing in return. That confuses him. And what confuses my father, he studies. Before Hollis could respond, a commotion erupted near the camp's perimeter. Voices raised in alarm. Warriors moved with sudden urgency, grabbing weapons, forming defensive positions. Kaya spun toward the sound, body tensing. Stay here. She sprinted toward the disturbance, leaving Hollis alone at the shelter's entrance. Through the gaps between structures, he could see warriors gathering at the camp's edge. Someone was shouting, words indistinct but urgent. Nahali strode toward the group, his presence commanding immediate attention. Hollis stepped forward despite the order to stay. His pulse hammered in his ears. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the sudden shift of energy. The way even the children had gone silent. A warrior ran into camp, breathing hard. His clothes were torn. Dust and sweat coated his skin. He spoke rapidly to Nahali, gesturing toward the horizon. Nahali's expression darkened. He barked orders, and the camp exploded into controlled chaos. Warriors mounted horses. Elders ushered children into shelters. Women gathered weapons of their own. Hollis caught Kaya as she rushed past. What's happening? She jerked her arm free, eyes blazing. They found us. A group of riders. Maybe 20. Heading this way. His stomach dropped. The men hunting your family? Worse. She looked at him with something close to accusation. They're not just hunting us anymore. They're asking about a rancher. A white man who helped 2 Apache women escape. The implication crashed over him like a wave. They weren't just coming for Nahali's family. They were coming for him, too. Nahali didn't waste time with explanations. He moved through the camp issuing commands, his voice cutting through the rising tension like a blade through fabric. Warriors responded instantly, forming defensive positions along the canyon's edge. Archers took elevated positions. Others created barriers using whatever materials were available. Carts, supply bundles, even saddles stacked strategically. Hollis stood near his assigned shelter, usefulness and helplessness warring in his chest. He wasn't one of them. He had no place in their defense. But standing idle while people who'd offered him protection faced danger felt wrong on a level he couldn't articulate. Kaya reappeared, moving with purpose. She thrust a rifle into his hands, his own, taken from the ranch. If you know how to use it, use it. If you don't, stay out of the way. Hollis checked the chamber. Still loaded. He looked at her. I'm not hiding while others fight because of me. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. Then stay close to Father. He'll tell you where to position. She moved away before he could respond. Hollis found Nahali near the center of the defensive formation, speaking with 3 older warriors. Maps drawn in the dirt showed the canyon's layout, escape routes, vulnerable points. Nahali looked up as Hollis approached, his gaze sharp and assessing. You know how to shoot? Well enough. Nahali gestured to a position behind a natural rock formation that offered both cover and a clear sight line toward the camp's entrance. There. Don't fire unless I give the order. We don't know what they want yet. Hollis moved into position, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sun had nearly set, painting everything in shades of orange and shadow. In the fading light, the approaching riders became visible, dark shapes cresting the ridge above the canyon. 20. Just as the scout had reported, maybe more behind them. They rode in formation, confident and unhurried. These weren't random drifters or opportunistic thieves. This group moved with military precision. Nahali stepped forward, standing in open ground where he could be clearly seen. He held no weapon. His hands remained at his sides, posture straight and unyielding. The message was clear. He wasn't backing down, but he wasn't attacking first either. The riders descended into the canyon, spreading into a loose semicircle that cut off the main exit. Their leader dismounted, a tall man with a beard going gray, dressed in worn leather, and carrying himself like someone accustomed to authority. 2 others flanked him, hands resting on their holstered weapons. The bearded man spoke, his voice carrying across the space. We're looking for 2 women, Apache, young, 1 injured. We have reason to believe they came through here. Nahali's expression remained impassive. Many people come through here. These 2 were helped by a rancher, white man living alone north of here. We need to speak with him, too. From his position behind the rocks, Hollis felt his blood run cold. They weren't even pretending this was about something else. They'd connected him to the sisters. They knew exactly what had happened. Nahali didn't move. Why do you seek them? The bearded man's jaw tightened. That's between us and them. No concern of yours. Everything that happens on this land is my concern. Nahali's voice remained level, but something dangerous edged beneath it. You ride into my camp, armed, making demands. That makes it my concern. The tension thickened. Hollis watched the other riders shift in their saddles, hands moving closer to weapons. This was a breath away from violence. The bearded man took a step forward. We don't want trouble with you. Give us what we came for, and we'll leave peacefully. And if I refuse? The question hung in the air like smoke. The bearded man's expression hardened. Then we'll take what we came for, one way or another. Behind the rocks, Hollis's finger moved to the trigger. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to stay hidden, to let Nahali handle this. But the truth was suffocating. These men were here because of him. Because he'd made a choice that pulled others into danger. Before he could second-guess himself, Hollis stood. He stepped out from behind the cover, rifle held loosely but ready, and walked toward Nahali's position. Every eye turned to him. The bearded man's expression shifted from annoyance to recognition. That's him. The rancher. Hollis stopped beside Nahali, close enough to show solidarity, but not so close he'd crowd the older man's authority. He looked directly at the bearded man. I'm here. Let's talk. Nahali didn't look at him, but his voice was quiet, meant only for Hollis. This isn't your fight. Hollis kept his eyes on the strangers. You said I made myself a target. Seems like the target should face what's coming. For a moment, nothing moved. The canyon held its breath. Then the bearded man smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Brave. Stupid, but brave. He gestured to his men. Bring him. 2 riders spurred their horses forward, closing the distance fast. Nahali moved so quickly, Hollis barely saw it. One moment, he was standing still. The next, he'd positioned himself between Hollis and the approaching riders. His hand raised in a gesture that stopped them cold. No one takes anyone from my camp without my permission. The bearded man's smile faded. You're protecting him? A white man? After what his kind have done to yours? Nahali's voice dropped to something colder than Hollis had heard yet. He gave my daughters his last horse. That makes him kin. And no one touches my kin. The words landed like thunder. The bearded man's expression darkened. His hand moved toward his weapon, and everything exploded. The first shot cracked through the canyon like breaking bone. Hollis dropped to the ground on instinct, dirt exploding inches from where he'd stood. Nahali moved with him, both hitting cover behind a supply cart as chaos erupted around them. Apache warriors returned fire from elevated positions, their aim precise and devastating. 3 of the bearded man's riders fell in the first volley. The others scattered, seeking whatever shelter the canyon offered. Horses screamed and bolted. Dust rose in choking clouds. Hollis pressed his back against the cart, breathing hard. His rifle felt heavy in his hands. Beside him, Nahali remained perfectly calm, assessing the battlefield with the practiced eye of someone who'd survived too many fights to panic during one more. How many rounds do you have? Nahali's voice cut through the noise. Hollis checked. 12. Make them count. A rider charged toward their position. Weapon raised. Hollis aimed, steadied his breathing, and fired. The man jerked backward, tumbling from his saddle. The horse kept running, disappearing into the smoke and confusion. Hollis's hand shook. He'd hunted his whole life. Deer. Small game. Once a bear that had threatened livestock. But he'd never shot at a person. The weight of it settled in his chest like stone. Focus. Nahali's voice yanked him back to the present. Regret later. Survive now. 2 more riders broke from cover, attempting to flank their position. Apache warriors intercepted them before they could close the distance. The confrontation devolved into hand-to-hand combat. Brutal, efficient, over in seconds. The bearded man was nowhere visible. Hollis scanned the chaos, trying to locate the leader. If they could stop him, maybe the others would retreat. Maybe this could end without more bloodshed. A figure moved near the camp's edge, creeping toward where the women and children had taken shelter. Not the bearded man, but one of his lieutenants. A younger man with a scar running down his cheek. He carried knife, moving with the practiced stealth of someone trained to kill quietly. Hollis's stomach dropped. There, heading for the shelters. Nahali saw it instantly. He whistled. A sharp, distinctive sound that cut through the noise. 2 warriors detached from their positions, moving to intercept. But the scarred man was closer. He'd reached the shelters first. Hollis didn't think. He broke from cover, running low and fast. His boots hammered against hard earth. The distance closed in what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than seconds. The scarred man reached the shelter's entrance, reaching for the hide covering. Hollis hit him like a battering ram. They crashed to the ground together, rolling in the dirt. The knife flew from the man's grip, landing several feet away. Hollis scrambled for it, but the scarred man recovered faster than expected. A fist connected with Hollis's jaw, snapping his head back. Stars burst across his vision. They grappled in the dirt. neither able to gain advantage. The scarred man was younger, faster. But Hollis had worked a ranch for years. His strength came from necessity, from hauling water and mending fences and doing whatever the land demanded. He locked his arms around the man's torso and squeezed until he felt ribs strain. The scarred man gasped, struggling to break free. Hollis held on, pouring everything he had into maintaining the grip. His muscles burned, his vision blurred. But he didn't let go. Kaya appeared above them, weapon in hand. She didn't hesitate. One precise strike, and the scarred man went limp. Hollis released him, gasping for air. His entire body ached. Kaya offered her hand, pulling him to his feet. You're either very brave or very stupid. Both. Probably. Hollis retrieved his rifle, checking to make sure it hadn't been damaged in the struggle. The fighting had mostly stopped. Bodies lay scattered across the camp. More of the attackers than defenders, but the cost was still visible. Wounded warriors were being tended to. The remaining attackers had retreated beyond the canyon's edge. Regrouping. Nahali strode toward them, his expression grim. They'll come back. This was just the first attempt. Hollis wiped blood from his split lip. Who are they? Why are they so determined? Before Nahali could answer, a voice called out from beyond the camp's perimeter. The bearded man. Still alive. Still in command. Nahali, we need to talk. Nahali's jaw tightened. He moved toward the voice, and Hollis followed. Despite every instinct screaming to stay behind cover, the bearded man stood at the edge of rifle range. Hands raised, but weapons still holstered. His remaining men flanked him. Fewer now, but still dangerous. You've made your point, the bearded man called. But this doesn't end here. You know that. Nahali's voice carried across the distance. Cold and clear. Then tell me why. Why hunt my daughters? Why track this rancher? Who sent you? The bearded man's expression twisted into something almost like pity. You really don't know, do you? Your daughters saw something they shouldn't have. Something that powerful men want buried. And the rancher. He gestured toward Hollis. He became a witness the moment he helped them. Hollis felt ice spread through his veins. What did they see? The bearded man smiled without humor. Ask them. If they'll tell you. But know this. We're not the only ones looking. And the next group that comes won't be as forgiving. He turned to mount his horse, then paused. Looking back. You bought yourself some time today. Use it wisely. Figure out what you're really protecting. Because once you know the truth, you might wish you'd handed them over. The remaining riders disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving only dust and the promise of future violence. Nahali stood motionless, staring after them. Then he turned to Hollis. And in his eyes was something Hollis hadn't seen before. Fear. Nahali didn't speak as they returned to the camp center. The wounded were being treated. Bodies of the fallen covered with blankets. The air smelled of gunpowder and blood. Children peeked from shelters, eyes wide with the kind of fear that would take years to fade. Hollis watched Nahali's face as they walked. The man who'd stood so confidently against 20 armed riders now carried tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of deeper worry than the fight itself. They stopped outside the larger shelter where Kaya had emerged earlier. Nahali turned to Hollis, and when he spoke, his voice was low enough that only they could hear. What I'm about to show you changes everything. Once you know, there's no going back to your ranch. No pretending you're just a man who helps some strangers. You understand? Hollis met his gaze. I think I passed that point when I gave them the horse. Something that might have been respect flickered across Nahali's features. He pulled back the hide covering and gestured inside. The shelter's interior was dimly lit by a single lamp. Nidita lay on a bedroll, her injured leg elevated and bandaged. She looked pale but alert, her dark eyes tracking them as they entered. Kaya sat beside her sister, one hand resting protectively on Nidita's shoulder. Nahali knelt near his daughters, his presence filling the small space. Tell him what you saw. Kaya's jaw tightened. Father. He needs to know. He's risked his life. He's earned the truth. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Nidida shifted, wincing at the movement. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than Hollis expected, but steady. We were hunting. 3 days north of here, near the canyon where the old trading post used to stand. She paused, gathering strength. We heard voices. Men. So we stayed hidden, watched from the ridge above. Hollis waited, tension building in his chest. There were 5 of them, Nidida continued. Well-dressed. Not ranchers or trappers. They looked like government men. Official. They were meeting with someone. A man in expensive clothes who arrived with 2 guards. Kaya picked up the story, her voice harder. They were negotiating. The government men wanted land. A specific piece of territory that belongs to several tribes, including ours. Sacred ground. Burial sites. She paused. The expensive man was offering to help them take it. For a price. Hollis felt his stomach turn. How? By making it look like we'd violated treaty terms. Staging attacks. Blaming our people. Giving them justification to move us off the land. Kaya's hands curled into fists. They discussed it openly. How many would need to die to make it convincing? Which settlements to hit first? How to make sure the violence looked authentic enough that no one would question the response. The implications crashed over Hollis like a wave. Land seizure wasn't new. He'd heard stories. Seen families displaced. Watched as promises got broken with bureaucratic efficiency. But this was different. This was premeditated. Organized. Murder disguised as policy. They saw you. Hollis looked at Nidida. She nodded. One of the guards. He spotted us on the ridge. We ran. They followed. We've been running ever since. Nahali's voice was quiet, but carried weight. If they succeed, dozens of families will be forced from land we've held for generations. If we resist, they'll have justification for violence. If we comply, we lose everything anyway. Hollis's mind raced. But if you have witnesses, if Nidida and Kaya can testify to what they heard, who would believe them? Kaya's voice was sharp. 2 Apache women against government officials and wealthy businessmen. In what court would that testimony matter? The question hung heavy because they all knew the answer. None. Nahali stood, his frame blocking most of the lamplight. This is why they hunt so relentlessly. This is why more will come. Those men can't afford to leave witnesses. And now you're a witness, too. You sheltered them. You helped them escape. That makes you dangerous to their plans. Hollis felt the full weight of his choice settling on his shoulders. He'd known giving a horse was risky, but he hadn't known it would pull him into something this large, this organized, this deadly. So what do we do? His voice came out rougher than intended. Nahali studied him for a long moment. You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect. You could leave, disappear, change your name, start somewhere else. Hollis thought about his ranch, already dead, his life there, already over. He thought about the moment he'd seen those 2 sisters, exhausted, bleeding, expecting nothing, and how something in him had broken at the sight. No, he said quietly. I gave them the horse. That makes them kin, right? That's what you told those riders. Nahali's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You understand what that means? You're choosing this fight, choosing to stand against people with resources and authority, and the willingness to kill anyone who threatens them. Hollis met his gaze steadily. I'm choosing not to run from people who want to murder families so they can steal land. Seems like a pretty clear choice to me. For the first time since they'd met, Nahali smiled. It was brief, barely visible in the dim light, but genuine. Then we plan. Because running won't save anyone. But the truth, properly delivered to the right people, might. Kaya looked between them. Father, even if we find someone to listen, those men will come for us before we can reach anyone who matters. Nahali's smile faded. I know. That's why we need to move tonight. Before they regroup. Before they bring more men. Hollis's pulse quickened. Move where? Nahali turned to face him fully. There's a federal marshal. 2 days' ride from here. He's one of the few officials I've met who actually honors his word. If we can reach him, tell him what my daughters witnessed. Show him the evidence." "What evidence?" Hollis interrupted. Nidida reached beneath her bedroll and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Worn and stained, but intact. I grabbed this from the expensive man's saddlebag while they were distracted searching for us." She handed it to Hollis. He unfolded it carefully, holding it toward the lamp. It was a contract. Detailed. Specific. Outlining payments, timelines, and methods for removing Native families from designated territories. Signatures at the bottom. Official seals. Government stamps. Names Hollis didn't recognize, but which clearly held authority. His hands shook as he read. This wasn't speculation. This was proof. "They'll kill everyone in this camp to get this back," Hollis said quietly. Nahali nodded. "Yes. Which is why we leave in 1 hour. Small group. Fast. You, me, my daughters, and 2 warriors I trust with my life. And everyone else? They scatter. Hide. Make it impossible to track where we've gone." Nahali's voice was firm. "It's the only way. We get this evidence to the marshal, or everyone dies anyway." Hollis looked at the contract again, at the signatures that condemned people to death for profit. He thought about his empty ranch, his dead life, the choice he'd made that led to this moment. 1 hour, he agreed. Outside, the camp began to move with urgent purpose. Families gathering belongings, preparing to disappear into the night. Warriors checking weapons, horses being readied. Hollis stood at the shelter's entrance, watching the organized chaos, and wondered if any of them would survive long enough to deliver the truth. And if anyone would care, even if they did. They rode through darkness, guided only by moonlight and Nahali's knowledge of terrain most men couldn't navigate in full daylight. 6 riders total, Nahali leading, followed by Kaya and Nidida sharing a horse. 2 warriors named Takoda and Kurik flanking them, and Hollis bringing up the rear on his own mount. The same horse he'd given away. The choice that started everything. They traveled in silence, pushing the horses as hard as they dared without risking injury. Behind them, the camp scattered like seeds on wind. Families disappearing into the landscape, making themselves invisible. Hollis wondered how many would survive if this plan failed. The contract remained tucked inside Nahali's shirt, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from the elements. That single piece of paper carried more weight than gold. It was evidence, proof. The difference between justice and massacre. Dawn broke cold and gray. They'd covered significant distance, but not enough. Takoda, scouting ahead, returned with news that tightened everyone's spines. Riders. 8, maybe 10. Moving fast. They're tracking us. Nahali's jaw set. How far? An hour behind. Maybe less if they don't stop. The group exchanged glances. Nidida's face had gone pale, her injured leg clearly causing pain despite the bandages. Kaya's hand moved to the rifle strapped to her saddle. The warriors checked their weapons without speaking. Hollis calculated distances in his head. 2 days' ride to the marshal, Nahali had said. They'd covered maybe a third of that. If pursuers caught them now, outnumbered and in open territory, the contract wouldn't matter. None of them would survive to deliver it. "We need to buy time," Nahali said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Split up. Make them choose." Kaya shook her head immediately. "Father, no. Not negotiable." Nahali's tone left no room for argument. "Takoda, Kurik, you take my daughters north. Follow the river route. Safer, but longer. The rancher and I go east. Draw the pursuit." Hollis understood instantly. The contract was with Nahali. If the pursuers wanted it badly enough, they'd follow whoever they thought had it. And Nahali wouldn't trust anyone else to carry something that important. "They'll know you have it," Hollis said quietly. "They'll come at you with everything." Nahali met his eyes. "Yes. Which is why I need someone who can shoot straight and won't run when things turn bad." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of trust that Hollis hadn't expected, but found himself accepting without hesitation. The group split within minutes. Dakota and Kuruk rode north with the sisters, Nidida casting one last look back before they disappeared into a canyon passage. Nahali and Hollis turned east, toward rougher terrain, and the pursuers behind them. They rode hard for another hour before Nahali signaled to stop. They'd reached a narrow passage between two rock formations, defensible, with high ground on both sides, but limited escape routes. Here, Nahali said, dismounting, we make our stand. Hollis slid from his horse, legs protesting after hours riding. We can't hold them off forever. Don't need forever, just long enough for my daughters to get clear. Nahali pulled the contract from his shirt, looking at it for a long moment. Then he handed it to Hollis. If something happens to me, nothing's happening to you. If something happens, Nahali continued firmly, you get this to Marshal Garrett. Town called Redemption. 2 days northeast from here. You tell him everything. Make him listen. Hollis took the contract, the weight of it settling in his hands like a burden he hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. Why trust me with this? Nahali's expression softened slightly. You gave my daughters your last horse. You could have kept it, saved yourself, let them die. Instead, you chose their lives over your own survival. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Before Hollis could respond, the sound of approaching riders echoed through the passage. Too many horses. Too close. They took positions on opposite sides of the passage, using rocks for cover. Hollis checked his rifle. 8 rounds left. He'd need to make every shot count. The riders appeared at the passage entrance. Not 8 or 10. 15. More had joined the pursuit. The bearded man led them, his face twisted with determination. He spotted Nahali and Hollis immediately. His voice carried across the distance, sharp and unforgiving. This is your last chance. Give us the contract and you can walk away. Nahali stood, exposing himself fully. Come take it. The response was immediate. Rifles raised. Hollis saw it happening. Saw the bearded man's hand drop. Saw fingers tighten on triggers. Time fractured into individual moments. Hollis fired first, dropping the nearest rider. Nahali's shot followed, precise and deadly. But there were too many. Return fire exploded around them. Bullets ricocheting off rock, kicking up dirt and stone fragments. Hollis ducked behind cover, reloading with shaking hands. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't like the camp. There was no reinforcement coming. No warriors to even the odds. Just 2 men against 15. A bullet struck near his head, close enough that he felt the displacement of air. He returned fire blindly, forcing the attackers to take cover. Across the passage, Nahali fought with calm efficiency, each shot deliberate. But even he couldn't hold forever. The bearded man called out again, his voice thick with frustration. You're dying for nothing. That contract won't change anything. Hollis pressed his back against stone, breathing hard. The contract pressed against his chest, safely tucked away. He met Nahali's eyes across the passage. The older man nodded once, a gesture of understanding, of acceptance. They were going to die here, but the contract would survive. The truth would survive. And sometimes that was enough. Hollis raised his rifle, ready for whatever came next. Then, the sound of gunfire from behind the attackers changed everything. Hollis looked up from his cover, confusion mixing with desperate hope. The bearded man's group spun around, caught between 2 forces. New riders poured into the passage. A dozen men in federal uniforms, led by a man wearing a marshal's badge that caught the morning light. Marshal Garrett had found them first. The bearded man's crew scattered immediately, but there was nowhere to run. The passage offered no escape routes. Within minutes, federal officers had surrounded the remaining attackers. Weapons drawn, orders shouted with the authority of law behind them. Hollis lowered his rifle, legs shaking so badly he had to lean against the rock to stay upright. Across the passage, Nahali emerged from cover, blood on his sleeve, but still standing. Marshal Garrett dismounted, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the scene. He was older than Hollis expected. Gray hair, deep lines around sharp eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He approached Nahali first, recognition clear between them. "Got word you were heading my direction," Garrett said. "Figured if you were making a run for me specifically, the situation was bad." Nahali's response was quiet but steady. "Worse than bad. We have evidence of government conspiracy to seize tribal lands through manufactured violence." Garrett's expression hardened. He looked at his men securing the prisoners, then back to Nahali. "Show me." Hollis pulled the contract from inside his shirt, hands still trembling from adrenaline. He handed it to the marshal, without a word. Garrett unfolded it carefully, reading in silence. With each line, his face grew darker. When he reached the signatures at the bottom, he swore under his breath. A short, vicious curse that carried more weight than anger. "These are federal officials. Appointed men." He looked at Nahali. "You understand what this means? The investigation this will trigger." "I understand it means families won't be slaughtered for profit." Nahali's voice was firm. "That's enough." Garrett nodded slowly. He turned to Hollis, studying him with the same sharp assessment. "And you are?" "The rancher who gave his horse away and got pulled into all this." Hollis's voice came out more bitter than he intended. Something shifted in Garrett's expression. Not quite sympathy, but understanding. "The report mentioned a white man who helped Nahali's daughters escape. Said you gave them your last means of transportation, knowing it would cost you everything." Hollis said nothing. What was there to say? Garrett folded the contract carefully, tucking it into his coat. "This evidence will be heard in a proper court, with proper witnesses. The men who planned this will answer for it." He gestured to the captured bearded man, now being bound by federal officers. "Including your friends here, who thought intimidation and murder were acceptable tools." The bearded man's face was ashen. Whatever authority he'd thought he possessed had evaporated the moment federal law arrived. He'd gone from hunter to prey in seconds. Over the next hour, Garrett's men secured the prisoners and took statements. Takota and Kuruk arrived with Kaya and Nidida, having circled back when they heard the gunfire stop. The reunion between Nahali and his daughters was quiet but profound. Hands clasped, foreheads touching, words spoken too softly for others to hear. Kaya approached Hollis while her father spoke with the marshal. Her expression was different now, softer. The suspicion that had marked their first interactions had transformed into something else. "My father wants you to come back with us, to the new camp, wherever we settle." Hollis looked at her, surprised. "I'm not. I don't belong with your people. You gave us your last horse." Kaya's voice was steady. "That makes you kin. Father's words, not mine. But I agree with them." She paused. "You have nowhere else to go. Your ranch is gone. You're wanted by the same people who wanted us dead. Coming with us isn't charity. It's family taking care of family." The word stuck in Hollis's throat. Family. He'd been alone for so long, he'd forgotten what that felt like. Nahali joined them, his wounded arm now bandaged. He extended his hand. Not a handshake, but a clasp of forearms. Warrior to warrior. "You gave my daughters your last horse when you had every reason not to. You stood beside me when you could have run. You protected what mattered when it would have been easier to let it burn." His grip tightened. "That debt can't be repaid, but it can be honored. You have a place with us for as long as you want it." Hollis felt something break loose in his chest. A knot he'd carried since his wife died, since the drought took everything, since he'd stopped believing in anything beyond survival. "I'd be honored," he managed. Marshal Garrett approached, the contract secure in his possession. "This will take time. Investigations, trials, appeals. But justice will be served. You have my word." He looked directly at Hollis. "What you did, giving up everything for strangers? That took courage most men don't have. The territory needs more people like you." 3 weeks later, Hollis helped construct a shelter in the new camp, located on protected land, far from the conspiracy's reach. His hands, calloused from years of ranch work, adapted easily to different construction methods. Children ran past, laughing. Elders shared stories by fires. Life continued, resilient and unbroken. Kaya brought him food as the sun set, sitting beside him in comfortable silence. Nidida's leg had healed. The trials had begun in distant courts. The contract's evidence had proven irrefutable. And every evening, Hollis would walk to where the horses were kept, finding the one he'd given away and gotten back. He'd run his hand along its neck, remembering the moment he'd made a choice that changed everything. He'd given his last horse to 2 Apache sisters at sunset. At dawn, their father had come with 200 warriors. And Hollis Vain had found something he'd thought was lost forever. A reason to keep going. A place to belong. A family that chose him as surely as he'd chosen them. Sometimes the things you give away come back transformed into exactly what you needed all along. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.